updates or things that have happened in your different organizations that you'd like to talk about now? And please use
How
your
about
little
Richard giving us a quick name of somebody on the Vineyard that is carrying urine diversion toilets and is willing to install them?
well, that's a good question. I wish I knew.
Bryan can answer that.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet, Chris. We have a preliminary work we have to do first, which is why we're having this conversation.
I saw one 30 years ago in Mexico. This can't be too hard.
It's not, but that's why we're here. So it's not too hard. It's widely used all over the world. It takes 80% of the nitrogen and 50% of the phosphorus out of the equation. It never enters the groundwater. But MASSTC is so woefully behind the times with application of this technology. And we are eons behind the state of Vermont, which is already using this technology widely through Rich Earth Institute in Southern Vermont. And urine's actually being used as a green fertilizer that's eliminating the need for commercially produced nitrogen-based fertilizers in agricultural applications. This is also being used commercially in France now and in other countries as an actual green resource that's eliminating the need for commercially produced nitrogen-based fertilizers, which is, I hope everyone here knows, is one of the #1 industrial emitters of greenhouse gas in the world. So what we're talking about here is really, it's essentially a closed loop system where we stop looking at quote unquote waste as waste. And I think as Bryan said, waste is just a resource that we have not yet figured out how to use. So urine diversion is this really simple technology that helps us conceive and apply human urine not as waste, but as a resource that can be used to eliminate the need for commercially produced nitrogen and phosphorus based fertilizers. So if there are other questions for Richard, great. And if not, I think I would turn it over there to Bryan to just give us a background.
Follow up on that, which is what happens to drugs in urine?
We're going to get there. Bryan has all this information for us. You're asking all the right questions. And Thomas Moakley also can't get into this meeting, so I'm going to resend him. Sherry, can you look and see if Thomas is trying to get in? Thomas is our new state rep. He's going to be on the call as well. He happily has something of a background in sustainable septic systems and is very interested in advancing urine diversion with DEP. And we were really happy. Sherry and I went with John Stanwood from Island Housing Trust to MASSTC, which is the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Site that Bryan works at Joint Base Cape Cod. There are 13 countries that are working with MASSTC on testing for innovative wastewater treatments. So this is one of the most cutting edge facilities in the world. We're so lucky to have them right here in Massachusetts. And Richard, I don't want to steal your thunder, but if you have anything else to address, go ahead. And if not, then I would turn over to Bryan to give a background on what MASSTC is doing, what urine diversion is, and where we are in this process.
Yep. Nope, I'm good. Let's hear from Bryan.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, thanks everybody. Those are some great questions to get me started off, and good introduction there by Laura on what we're talking about and why we think this is a valuable approach to look at. So I guess I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and I have a few slides I thought I'd show you all. It actually says the host has disabled participants.
Oh, I think you just got muted too, Bryan. I don't know what happened. Sherry, can you?
Sorry.
Sherry, can you invite Bryan to unmute? I don't know what happened. There we go. Okay.
He's back in.
Okay. Can you enable screen sharing for him?
Yes, he is. Hold on.
Okay.
So I guess I can just start giving a little background. So as Laura mentioned, I work for the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, or MASSTC as we call it. We're also a division of the Barnstable County Department of Health and the Environment. So we're part of Barnstable County government. Specifically part of the, I'm back in. Okay, thank you. let's see. Okay, can you guys see my slide there?
Yes.
Cool.
And I'm gonna just drop, Sherry, I don't know if you can share this with everyone, but I'm gonna drop the MASSTC website into the chat. I can't share with the whole group, but if there's a way you can to share with the whole group, that would be super.
Okay, yeah, so I'll run you through, I got about 15 slides here, and I'll work my way through it, and then maybe we can just do some conversation at the end, whatever questions come up. I already wrote down a couple of questions from the start there. So again, I work with Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment, specifically at the MASSTC, the Septic System Test Center. The test center was initiated back in 1999, so this is our 25th year anniversary this year. And really the primary focus of the work we do here at the test center is on testing and helping support the development of alternative or advanced treatment septic systems that are geared towards removing nutrients that are causing water pollution problems. So obviously I'm here to talk about urine diversion, which is sort of a new branch that's building here at the test center. And just sort of shows that we're really interested in any emerging or innovative technology that can help us improve our water quality problems on the Cape. So this next slide here, this is meant to sort of just describe like the problem. This is why we're doing what we're doing. This is the State of the Waters Cape Cod report, which was put out by the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. I believe they've only done 2 or so of these reports. The first one came out in 2019. And you can see on the left side there that in 2019, their analysis of all the water quality monitoring data for all of the embayments around the Cape found that about 68% of the water quality was unacceptable. And then jump ahead 4 years to 2023, and that number went from 68% to 90% unacceptable. So this is a growing problem on the Cape, and I'm quite sure it's a similar issue on the island. So yeah, very, very, very concerning, given that our entire, economy and basically the whole point of living here is to be around these beautiful and just amazing water bodies. And so we really need to do something to improve the conditions. And it's widely agreed upon, throughout the whole scientific and environmental community that the main problem causing these water quality issues are nutrients from on-site septic systems. So the traditional cesspools, or as we call them, the Title V septic systems, are really just designed to get rid of wastewater. So anything that goes down your drain or down your shower or down your toilet or out your dishwasher, all of that stuff is going into a septic system in most cases, which does a good job at getting the bacteria away from you and getting the water away from you. But they also serve basically as a nutrient injection system. So all the nutrients that are leaving your household, in most cases, are going to the groundwater and then causing pollution in water bodies. And a really interesting point, and one of the reasons that we think this idea of urine diversion makes so much sense, is that the majority of the nutrients, like around 80%, entering residential wastewater, enter in the form of urine. So it's only about 1% of the volume of residential wastewater, but it's about 80% of the nutrients. So we see that as a real big opportunity to maybe address the problem at the source rather than trying to address it further down the road where it's more expensive and less efficient to deal with. So this next slide is intended to talk about sort of our regional wastewater planning on the Cape. So knowing that we have water quality problems, knowing that on-site septic systems are the main culprit causing those water quality problems, this slide intends to sort of just lay out like what are we doing to try to address that right now. The map itself actually shows which areas on the Cape where we have sewers. So the black areas on the map show the sewered areas. I should point out this is a 2022 map, so there has been a little bit of sewer expansion since then. But currently about 85% of the Cape is still reliant completely on-site management of wastewater, so not sewered. There are plans among many of the towns on the Cape, including Falmouth and Barnstable, Harwich, Orleans. I think that's most of them, that they're planning to expand their sewered areas to try to address this nutrient pollution problem. But even at the maximum build out from all the plans that I've heard of so far, that's only going to address about 40% of the nitrogen pollution on the Cape. So we still have the bulk of the problem to be addressed even after sewers are installed. And I should also point out that the sewering plans are all in the multi-decadal time span. So you're looking at 10, 20, or 30 years to get most of these homes hooked up to sewer, which I think in most people's minds at this point, given our current water quality problems, is just not fast enough. I also want to point out that that's also the most expensive approach, which is why, the ultimate plan is not to sewer all of Cape Cod, because it would just be way, way too expensive. You're talking billions and billions of dollars to do something like that. So yeah, I think I mentioned, the timeline is a consideration, the cost is a consideration. And then the other consideration that I think is really important with wastewater management is energy consumption. Because, when you're talking about an environmental issue like water quality, there's usually multiple factors at play. And, nutrients are the main problem that are causing, algal growth and low oxygen conditions, habitat destruction. But energy consumption and burning fossil fuels to treat wastewater is problematic in my mind, because we also have a climate issue that is affecting our water bodies, and there are long-term water temperature trends that are trending upward just as fast as global CO2 is trending upward. And so if we're not dealing with energy issues at the same time as nutrient issues, I think we're not going to solve this problem. So I think this all of this information presents, I think, a really big opportunity for urine diversion systems and eco toilet systems in general that have the potential to be implemented more quickly at lower cost and with less energy consumption in the process. So now this next slide just looks specifically at what the town of Falmouth is doing. The reason I'm talking about Falmouth is this is kind of where this real interest in urine diversion systems has been growing on the Cape, and I've been working directly with the town along with a team of consultants to sort of assess urine diversion as another tool in the toolbox for dealing with nutrients. But so basically the town of Falmouth's plan to address their water quality problems basically entails two approaches. So right now they're looking at expanding sewers. And so you can see on this map, the light green area is the areas that have existing sewers. And this is actually a fairly recent map. And then the dark green area is where they're proposing to expand sewers to. So these are like these really densely developed sort of peninsulas in between their ponds on the south side of town. And then the blue areas are areas where the town is planning to mandate the installation of advanced treatment septic systems. And so that's right now, that's what they're planning to do to meet their watershed nutrient reduction requirements. Although there's been a lot of interest among people in town, among town meeting voters, and among some town staff in this idea of using urine diversion systems as an alternative approach. And so the town has actually hired MASSTC, with myself being the lead on that project, as well as this consulting team. And I put all the consultants' logos in here. So we have the nonprofit Rich Earth Institute out of Brattleboro, Vermont. We have Nutrient Networks, who is also a nonprofit, Point of Shift, and also we have a regulatory consultant from the University of Michigan working with us. So I feel really confident in saying that we basically have the dream team working here, that like U.S. national dream team on eco sanitation and urine diversion systems, trying to figure out how to basically prepare urine diversion to address our water quality issues. So then I wanted to just go in a little bit about what do urine diversion systems look like? What does this entail? So there, the first part is the toilet. That's where the collection happens. So there's really sort of three categories of urine diverting toilet fixtures, as we call them. So number one is waterless urinals. I see that as a really sort of easy way to get into urine diversion, because there's no real difference to the user. It's a same old urinal, except it doesn't flush down with water. And rather than the urinal connecting to a sewer or a septic system, it connects to a holding tank where the urine gets captured. I also wanted to point out that there are sit-down urinals that allow both sexes to use them. Whether you're standing up or sitting down, there are opportunities for waterless urinals that way. And then the other two types of toilet fixtures I wanted to point out are urine diverting dry toilets, which is the one sort of pictured by itself in the middle of the slide there. And the way that that works is that basically has a urinal built into the front of the toilet. So when you sit down on that toilet, you pee and it goes in the urinal. It's pretty straightforward. And then the back section of the toilet goes into a dry composting container. So that's why it's called a UD dry toilet. And what's really nice about this fixture is that there's absolutely no water usage and therefore no water pollution in that system. And we actually have one of these here at the test center.
I was just gonna say, if anyone's on the mainland and wants to go try out one of these toilets, I used this toilet and it was a great user experience at MASSTC. So you have an opportunity to actually visit MASSTC and try all this stuff out. It's, you know, proof of concept, which is a really great opportunity.
Yeah, we're just getting started on retrofitting all of our bathrooms here at the test center with these type of eco toilets, specifically for that reason, so that, you know, anybody that comes and visits the site and wants to see one firsthand or even try it out firsthand is welcome to do that. And then the last category of urine diverting toilets I wanted to mention was these urine diverting flush toilets. So you could probably figure out what that means just by the name, but the two pictured on the right are examples of urine diverting flush toilets. And there's sort of two different ways that those work. The one on the right, the Wostman Eco Flush, is basically very similar to the dry toilet on the far left, except that rather than having the feces go into a composting chamber, the feces are flushed into the septic system or the sewer, just like a conventional toilet. So that toilet only diverts the urine component, which again is about 80% of the nutrients. And then the Laufin Save toilet has a little bit of a different method of diverting the urine, it was actually really nice. And these are becoming very popular in Europe. This is a Swedish design toilet. And I've heard a lot about, you know, different projects where these are being installed in large buildings and urban areas in Sweden and France and different countries in Europe. But the way that these work is rather than having a urinal built into the toilet bowl, they use what's called the teapot effect to divert the urine. So you can see in the diagram at the bottom where the urine comes in and basically hits the porcelain bowl and then just kind of adheres to the bowl through the natural, you know, liquid adhesion properties and just diverts out through a small channel in the bottom of the bowl. So the nice thing about these is that just like a waterless urinal, there's no difference in user experience whatsoever. So that there are options out there. I should also mention that there's recent news of a very large American toilet manufacturer that is developing an American-made urine diverting toilet. So that's coming soon. We're hoping to see that by the spring. And then, you know, once you collect in the urine in the toilet fixture itself, then there's the question of what happens to the urine after that. So this is an example of sort of a template drawing of what this might look like in a house. So that the urine is collected in the toilet fixture or the urinal. There's you know, plumbing that diverts it down to a storage tank, and typically it's placed in the basement, but it can also be placed outside of the foundation like a septic tank, you know, underground. But basically the concept is you divert the urine into a tight holding tank and then provide access to a pump out port on the outside of the house. So, you know, the storage tank would be sized for, you know, an appropriate volume for the number of people living in the home. And, you know, sized large enough so that the frequency of pump out is acceptable. So, you know, maybe it's twice a year or even once a year, depending on the size of the tank and the usage. And then I had a second drawing that just shows one of those urine diverting flush toilets configured, connected to the septic system and to the urine diversion holding tank. And then the next question, obviously, is, you know, after you collect and store the urine in a holding tank, what happens to it next? So this diagram was created by the nonprofit Rich Earth Institute, which is the organization that, you know, we're working with to help develop this project in Falmouth. But they've also been operating a urine diversion program, a community scale urine diversion program in Vermont for about the past 10 years. And this is basically the the path of urine flow through that program. So they're collecting mostly at residential homes and at a couple of businesses and restaurants and breweries and things like that. They have a truck go out and pump out those storage tanks, which then transports the urine to a central treatment facility, which in Vermont, they call it their urine depot. So they bring the material there where it's treated. It's actually pasteurized typically, so heated up to a certain temperature for a certain time, and that will kill off any pathogens, including bacteria and viruses. And then they're actually using that pasteurized urine as a fertilizer and applying it primarily on hay fields, on non-edible crops. And this, it seems to be a very successful process that they have going in Vermont. And this is, basically the model that we're looking to replicate here on the Cape and Islands.
And if I could just interject and add in there, the pasteurizer itself is a small piece of equipment. You'd be surprised it's about just this wide by, maybe about 4 feet tall. It can pasteurize urine in 90 seconds. And one pasteurizer costs about $6,000 and it can do 60 gallons a day. So it's pretty, implementable technology, and it doesn't take up a huge amount of room. And then I just want to ask, because I'm not sure, I hear a lot of dinging in my headphones that indicate that people are putting questions in the chat, but I'm not seeing them. Are people putting questions in the chat, or is there just something
I might have
that
been
I'm
on
not seeing?
Or I just silenced I was getting Teams messages from everybody around the office here.
Okay, great. Thank
Sorry
you.
about
I
that.
appreciate that. That's okay.
That's the worst I've ever heard it. And of course, it's while I'm talking, right?
There was a lot of it. Okay, thanks, Bryan.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay. So yeah, so this is the Rich Earth Institute's, basically treatment, train, and reuse application of urine, and they call it P-cycling. Let's see. There we go. All right, so at this point, with working mostly with the town of Falmouth and the consulting team that I mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of planning for a pilot study of using urine diversion at the community scale in the town of Falmouth, although it's applicable for really anywhere in the state that has nutrient pollution issues. So we're working on this planning to try to prepare urine diversion for a full-scale pilot study, basically. And so the goals of this planning work are to gain the needed regulatory approvals to allow for the installation and operation of urine diverting toilet systems, and to define how the towns can account for the nutrient removal credit toward their watershed TMDLs or toward their watershed nutrient reduction requirements. So right now, there have been some urine diversion system installations in the state of Massachusetts, although they need to be permitted on a case-by-case basis. So with this project, we're looking to gain, basically statewide approval so that the permitting and design process will be streamlined. And then also right now, despite that some of these systems have been installed, there's no formal credit pathway for towns to get, to gain credit toward their watershed requirements. So this is really important, for any of the towns to want to really invest in this. They need to have that credit in place so that they can report back to the state and say that they are, indeed reducing their nutrient pollution by using these type of systems. So far this work has been funded through an intermunicipal agreement from the town of Falmouth to the Septic System Test Center. And we're still working under that agreement at this point, although we're basically at the stage of producing a sort of mid-planning report to the town so that we can reevaluate, next steps needed and figure out how to, complete the planning beyond that point. So right now, the three sort of key regulatory approvals that we're trying to achieve are a provisional use approval through the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. We're also needing a approval from the Massachusetts Plumbing Board, and that would basically look at those specific toilet fixtures I showed earlier and the associated plumbing and storage systems. So that would be under the Plumbing Board's jurisdiction to approve that system. And we are actively having some back and forth conversations with them and planning to get in front of the board for an in-person hearing to basically defend our application. And then lastly, we're we're needing an approval from the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, or MDAR, in order to approve the recycling of the urine as fertilizer. And I threw this picture of this big spaceship looking thing on the bottom of the slide here is a composting drum that I've been really interested in as another method of recycling the urine into fertilizer. So, as we mentioned in Vermont, they're basically just pasteurizing the urine and using it as a liquid fertilizer, which is certainly one approach we want to look at here. But I also think this concept of mixing the urine with another high carbon waste source, such as wood chips or wood shavings, or leaves that everybody's raking and blowing off their yards,
Or biochar.
or biochar. Yeah, thank you, Laura. And composting it thermophilically. You put it in this big drum, and with the right mix, the right recipe, it gets nice and hot, and it all breaks down and ends up producing a nice nutrient-rich soil amendment, or mulch, that could then be land applied as a beneficial soil amendment. So that's where we're at, kind of right now in the planning phase. And then I wanted to lay out, what are we envisioning for the full study? So the planning is preparing us for this full study that we need to do. And our conversations with Massachusetts DEP have indicated that we need at least 50 systems monitored for a period of 3 years. So we're looking to install between 50 and 75 systems. We're looking at residential installations for the most part, because I think that's most of the parcels that we're dealing with on the Cape and Islands. But certainly having some of those installations in public facing settings would be really beneficial for demonstration purposes, for people to see what they look like. So we plan to install those systems, to monitor them for a period of 3 years, with quarterly inspections and sampling happening throughout that time period. And those inspections and sampling would include basically an analysis of the urine that is collected. So understanding what the nutrient content of the urine is, what the volume of the urine is, and then also what the nutrient content left over in the septic system is. And those sort of 3 points of information are what the DEP would like to see in order to provide, or in order to estimate what that acceptable credit should be for removing nutrients from the watersheds. And then once we've collected all that data, the plan is to basically write it up in a report and submit it to the Massachusetts DEP. And they will be looking to assess urine diversion as what they call an alternative control approach or technology. And that's something similar to like fertilizer reduction as a nutrient reduction strategy. I know some of the towns around the Cape are looking at, developing these fertilizer regulations that they could then use to get credit for removing nutrients from watersheds. We're also looking at DEP to look at urine diversion as basically an innovative alternative on-site septic system. So those are sort of two regulatory tracks that we're addressing with this monitoring plan. And then the ultimate goal is, if we do monitor 50 systems for 3 years, we could achieve what they call general use approval for urine diversion. And that will basically just make the whole permitting and installation path much more streamlined. And it will also reduce the need for the quarterly sampling. That would basically reduce the sampling and monitoring down to once per year for any of these systems. So those are the main goals of the study. And then sort of, where we're at now and next steps, and possibly opportunities for Martha's Vineyard to participate in this project. I mean, just stepping back, this doesn't have to be all within the Falmouth boundaries. In fact, this is a regional benefit to everywhere on the Cape and Islands. And so I would love to see, more participation on the Vineyard and really any of the Cape towns. But where we're at right now is we're working to complete the planning scope. We still have a bit of work to do to gain those needed approvals, and to determine the management strategies. So again, figuring out what to do with all the urine after we collect it. Right now, the fallback plan is to have septage haulers pick it up and put it in wastewater treatment plants. But that's not, the ultimate goal. Ultimately, we want to be recycling it and utilizing it as a fertilizer to offset any synthetic fertilizers that are currently being brought onto the Cape and Islands. The other thing we need to do is more outreach to identify more potential participants. So that's something that, if you folks on the Vineyard are interested, putting a message out to see if anybody might be interested in participating in a study like this. Currently on the Cape, we have a list of about 175 people. Although we're not going to stop there, because we know, as we start the process of assessing those homes, a lot will probably drop off of that list. If it's too expensive to install in their home, or they decide it's not the type of toilet they want to be using. So I think that, the more robust our list of potential participants is, the better to start off. We're also looking at needing to develop a full project design. I mentioned right now we're just in the planning phase, but we are developing this report actively right now, which will basically provide sort of all the details of the full project. And we need funding. We're estimating at this point that the full project, the full 3-year 50 system project, will require somewhere around $1.9 million. We have been talking with the town of Falmouth about that, but that's unsure at this point if the town's going to be willing to come up with all that money. There has been quite a bit of pushback in that, as I mentioned, this is really a regional benefit, and so I think sharing the cost among multiple towns would be a sensible approach. Once we get the full project design in place, and once we have funding in hand, that'll sort of trigger the next few bullets here. We'll start off by actually going to the homes of the people who have signed up as possible participants and doing an in-home assessment. So figuring out, what opportunities there are in that home for installing these toilet fixtures, and then coming up with system designs and going through the permitting and installation process in the homes that ultimately determine they are able and interested to put these toilet systems in. Once we have all the systems installed, then we'll go through the process of monitoring those systems, doing the sample collection, collecting the resulting data. And like I mentioned, we'll end with a final report to DEP, and hopefully figure out a fair nutrient removal credit. So I think that's all I wanted to say in terms of the presentation. I'm happy to open up to questions or further discussion.
That was great. Thank you very much. Very easy to understand. So if anybody, I guess you got to close your screen so I can see,
sorry.
half the people.
Stop sharing if I can figure that out. Are you back yet? Are you still seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
There you go. Good. Good. All right. And Chris just put his hand up. That's what I'd like everybody to do. Put your hand up like Chris has. So I know you want to speak. And I've got 2 screens I got to keep track of. So just try and be patient. Go ahead, Chris.
So my first question, Bryan, is what about chemicals in the urine? Chemicals is the wrong word. Medicines.
Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, all that is a concern. Yeah, I guess I've got 2 responses on that. So number one, our current on-site wastewater management systems, like our septic systems, don't remove those, and they put them into our groundwater. And so currently, on the Cape, for example, our groundwater is our drinking water. So we're, essentially injecting those into our groundwater right now and then drinking them. Not that that's okay, but by diverting the urine, there certainly are some pharmaceuticals in the urine, and potentially some other chemicals of concern. But in terms of my understanding of wastewater management in general is that if you take that material and put it underground, it doesn't go away. So if you're putting it in a septic system, it doesn't go away. But if you put it in the upper soil layers where there are plants, where there's microbial diversity, and you get a lot of treatment. Actually, you get a lot of removal. So by applying it, closer to the land surface, you actually get a lot more breakdown of those materials. And then, the other point is that the Rich Earth Institute, who I mentioned earlier, have been doing this for 10 years, and they're aware of that concern, and they've done quite a bit of testing and found that the concentrations of pharmaceutical drugs in urine is really sufficiently low that it doesn't present a large health threat. They've done studies where they apply urine to, like, say, a bed of lettuce where they're growing lettuce, and then they've harvested the lettuce and tested the lettuce for those pharmaceuticals, and the uptake is just so minuscule that it's really not that much of a concern. I mean, it's certainly something that we're talking about with regulators, and certainly going to be, something that we're not ignoring. We're paying attention to that. I also think that's one of the reasons why Rich Earth targets things like hay fields as their primary fertilizing area rather than edible crops.
Does the pasteurization affect that?
Does not. Now, the pasteurization is just meant for pathogens, so it just kills bacteria and virus.
I see Sarah's hand up.
Yes, can you tell us how complicated or expensive it is to put one of these urine diversion toilets into an existing house that's on a septic system?
Yeah, there's a lot of variability there, and that's part of the reason why I mentioned we have to do those in-home assessments as sort of a first step in the process. I think there's a very big difference in cost from home to home. Like, imagine if you have, a one-story home with an unfinished basement, and space in the basement for a storage tank. That would be a pretty straightforward installation. I think, initial estimates for something like that are around $5,000. Installed, including the labor of the plumber and everything. If you're talking about a home with 2 floors and not a clear pathway from the upstairs bathroom to the basement, and maybe a finished basement, then you're looking at higher cost. But it's really a case by case basis.
Anybody else have a question?
I was just going to suggest, Richard, since we just got that question about retrofitting, if we could maybe go over to John Stanwood at IHT to talk about roughing in plumbing and new construction, because the Island Housing Trust is actually going to be doing this on their new Cat Hollow project with the anticipation that approval for these systems will be coming from the state. And it would also give IHT projects the opportunity to participate in any pilot project that that DEP partners with MASSTC on. Would that be okay?
Thank you.
Great. That's great. Yeah,
Hi.
go ahead, John.
I'm John Stanwood. I'm a project manager at Island Housing Trust, and I do all the coordination for all of our nitrogen mitigation for our projects. And we identified urine diversion as a potential tool to help make our projects less impactful on our watersheds. And we're seeing specifically Cat Hollow is an imperiled watershed. And we kind of saw ourselves as, with new builds, it's really easy to kind of just put in the rough infrastructure for the potential of any pilot project that might form, like what was just being proposed. And we're in a unique position because we, do cluster developments, and so we could potentially get 6 or 10 units like right, in one spot, easy to collect, very efficient. And that's just one reason why we've been so interested in it, is we want to be able to reduce our nitrogen. We want these tools to be certified so that they can be counted in our nitrogen counts, so that when we're actually removing nitrogen, that can lower our total nitrogen in the eyes of the state, so that it can reduce the work that we have to do offsite. Occasionally, we have to pay for other systems to be upgraded in order to make sure that our projects are net zero. Our projects are always net zero, and this just allows for another tool in the toolkit for us to make our projects low impact.
Well, I think that's fantastic. I think that'll make it easier for the permitting process for these projects too. That's great. Anybody else? I've
Richard,
seen it.
it's not really a question, but it just seems to me this whole business of collecting is going to be the Achilles heel for this. You put in the system, you have a tank. Now, who's going to come and collect it? And it's easy from the top down. You make the regulations, you install the equipment. Now you're looking for somebody to come and collect it. If you started from the other direction, maybe both directions, but if you start from the bottom and find a farmer who's willing and would be happy to have this collection, and fund him to develop the system, the truck, the spreading system, however that's going to work, whether you're loading it into existing compost or whatever, that would save all the communities a huge amount of money. If somebody was actually making maybe not a profit in cash, but making, however you want to look at it, a profit off of doing this, then they'd be motivated to do it. And the record keeping can all be done. It's not, it's not real complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree, and we have actually been sort of trying to address it from both ends, and we've definitely contemplated exactly that concept. And I would say, I've actually met with a few local farmers here on the Cape who want urine-derived fertilizer. The problem is that they can't do anything with it until the regulations are in place, and so we're kind of stuck in both directions until we address the regulations. But yeah, I definitely have, a few local farmers. I know a golf course manager. I know a fertilizer salesperson. I think, there's a lot of opportunities. And I think, we mentioned it in Vermont, there's at least one farmer that's actually paying for pasteurized urine right now. So there is certainly an interest, and, this has the potential to, greatly reduce the input costs, for farmers, because fertilizer is one of their biggest expenses.
Yeah, Chris, there's going to be a lag time before private farmers can actually do what you're suggesting because of this 3-year process that we need to go through for DEP approval.
Well,
so
that would be true if they were putting it on a product that they were selling as a food source.
no,
But
it's true
putting
for
it on
any
flowers.
it's true for any application right now in Massachusetts, unfortunately.
So Nantucket, years ago, Nantucket was putting all of the sludge from their sewer plant into their composting system.
Mhm.
And their big problem was that nobody wanted it in their yard because they were afraid of the medicines, the pharmaceuticals that were in it. So the only place they were using that was on the sides of the road. But they were doing it, that was easily 10 years ago. And
yeah, there are actually very specific regulations. They call it the biosolids and residuals regulations that are in place to allow the application of basically treated sludge from treatment plants. Although they've run into a lot of issues recently with PFAS, or the forever chemicals, which tend to be in very high concentrations in sludge. Urine is a much more suitable fertilizer product for a lot of reasons, because it does contain some pharmaceuticals, but compared with biosolids, it's much more of a pure nutrient source. Biosolids have PFAS, they have metals, they have microplastics. There's a whole bunch of problems with biosolids, and we've actually seen, for example, the state of Maine, put a moratorium on biosolids application, and so most of our biosolids at this point from this region are being incinerated, which is really concerning. We're trucking all these biosolids out to Cranston, Rhode Island, and incinerating them. So I think urine is a much more suitable fertilizer. And I agree with you that it should be allowed to be put on the ground, certainly on non-edible crops right now. But our regulators are very hesitant to give us a thumbs up on that until they give it a really thorough look. So we're working on the approvals.
There is already another study going on. It's been going on for going on almost 10 years now, to deal with food waste, because food waste, organics, makes up 60% of what they haul off island. All that waste, which is mostly water. So we're working on a project. I was so glad to hear that you encouraged mixing it in one of the turbines that we're trying to buy and have installed here on the island. And that would be a great way to get rid of this stuff. So that this is all sort of coming together. So I'm really think this is great. I see 2 hands up. John Shirless.
Thanks very much. Very interesting presentation, and I'm glad to hear about the progress on this. I was wondering if alternative scenarios have been explored with respect to costs involved. For example, I understand that Clean 2, in addition to their nitrogen removal or nitro system, has the capacity to, I gather, at least as efficiently or effectively, 90-some% remove phosphorus from waste. And so this is something that would either be installed de novo or after the fact with existing septic systems. Has anyone looked into the cost of this? Obviously, it's a different model because it doesn't involve the greater number of variables and the more complicated system that you're talking about for urine diversion.
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. So looking at the cost of phosphorus removal.
In other words, well, if the interest is in removing nutrients from removing urine from the system, so to remove the nutrients within urine,
yeah,
from the ecosystem,
yeah,
one means of addressing phosphorus is an add-on, that a component that I gather that Clean 2 is working on or has available. In, I don't know what stage it is with respect to approval, analogous to their nitrogen system, that would be an add-on to existing septic systems. So in other words, instead of all of the costs involved in creating the system necessary for urine diversion, it would just be one add-on per home septic system to remove phosphorus. So what the net cost of that would be compared to everything involved in urine diversion with respect to the goal of removing phosphorus from the system.
Yeah, so I'm aware, we test those IA septic systems here at the test center, and we have 3 systems that are designed for phosphorus removal specifically. I guess, comparing that to urine diversion is tricky because part of the point of urine diversion is recycling those nutrients. And, phosphorus is one that is globally limited, like nitrogen fertilizer, we can synthetically make through the Haber-Bosch process, as much as we want. But phosphorus fertilizer, on the other hand, is globally limited, and it's only available through mining. And so it's getting more and more expensive to continue to mine it. So, I think one of the real value points of urine diversion is to provide this circular nutrient management. So, rather than having to continue to create more and more nutrients and continue to expend energy to dispose of them, we need to kind of rethink things and figure out how to, recycle the ones that we have. In terms of cost, I don't know off the top of my head, for those different systems. But I think urine diversion systems are pretty cost competitive with innovative septic systems.
John, I just wanted to clarify too, because I'm not sure that it was totally clear in the presentation, that the urine diversion actually it diverts the phosphorus as well as the nitrogen, because 50% of the phosphorus going into the waste stream is coming from human urine. So it diverts 50% of the phosphorus out. So you're not actually, you need less mitigation on the treatment end because you've actually removed that source from going into the waste stream. Is that what you were asking about as far as the IA system?
In part, my understanding is that Clean 2's phosphorus system removes well over 90%, maybe more than 95% of the phosphorus from the system. I understand the point about the availability of phosphorus as a resource, but if one is simply to simplify this, this is an intrinsically complicated proposition because you're trying to solve a number of different things at the same time, as Bryan has just stated. And what I'm asking is, if the goal is simply to protect the waters of Cape Cod and the islands by removing phosphorus, in this case, and because we know what Clean 2 can do with respect to nitrogen, what is the cost of that compared to doing urine diversion? And then as a separate issue is to model the economics of phosphorus as a limited resource globally and otherwise.
Yeah, the one thing, we promote here at the test center a lot is that, we really need all the tools in the toolbox, I think is, a good response to that. Like there's a lot of people out there that think, that wastewater management is like us versus them, the IA systems versus the sewers versus the urine diverters. But really the way we try to promote it here at the test center is we need everything. Our waters are in really bad shape right now, and they're quickly getting worse. And with sewer taking multiple decades to roll out, honestly, advanced septic systems are also a multi-decadal implementation. The town of Falmouth, for example, is looking at mandating installation of 7,000 innovative septic systems. And, Clean 2 is at this point still a relatively small company. So there's definitely going to be, quite a lag in order to get those systems made and installed. And so I think if we're sort of attacking, our nutrient problems from as many angles as possible, we have the best chance of dealing with the problem more quickly. In terms of cost, like I said, it's a little bit like I haven't actually seen Clean 2's phosphorus removing system yet. I do know of one that's called the Waterloo ECP. Waterloo is a company out of Canada. Waterloo Biofilter, I think they call themselves. And their phosphorus removing product is called the ECP. And what it is an iron electrode plate that is suspended down into a septic tank and is connected to a power source, and basically just releases iron ions into the wastewater and binds with the phosphorus. So you're not able to recover the phosphorus, but it does a pretty good job of removing phosphorus. Those systems are probably comparable in price to a urine diverting system, would be my guess. They're compared to like a full scale nitro or other nitrogen removing IA system. They are less complicated, but still, probably in the $5,000 range would be my guess to install one.
See Sarah's hands up again.
Yeah, you mentioned you were looking for volunteers to participate in your pilot study on Martha's Vineyard. So I just wondered if a homeowner wanted to participate, do you pay the cost of installing one of these urine diversion toilets, or do they do that?
That's a great question. And the plan would be that we get funding for this full study that would cover the cost of installation and all the sampling and maintenance during the project period. So that's the hope, is that we could cover the full cost. Right now, the fact that we're dealing with this, or, we're looking for funding through the town of Falmouth, that obviously raises some concern. We're looking at probably an average cost of $10,000 per household, because a lot of households are going to have more than one toilet. And so, the ideal scenario is that we replace every toilet in the household with a urine diverting toilet fixture. It's not required, but it's ideal. So the more of those sort of full retrofits we get, the better. So I think, probably $10,000 per household installation cost is a good target. So we're looking for that funding source. We've applied to one grant through DEP and have not heard back yet. And we're trying to keep our eyes open for any possible funding sources, so that, hopefully we can pay the full cost for participants.
So part of the reason that Sherry and I that Sherry and I had talked about this and bringing this to the Water Alliance as a potentially actionable item is that, I think it's understandable that the town of Falmouth is reluctant to shoulder the full $1.9 million price tag for this study, because it does have regional application. And because Martha's Vineyard was so instrumental in moving the IA technology forward, because we got so engaged at the start, it provided momentum for John Smith and for approval, of IA systems at DEP. Is there an opportunity for Martha's Vineyard, for the Water Alliance, and for other groups on Martha's Vineyard, in conjunction with the towns, to get involved in partnership with the town of Falmouth and potentially the rest of the Cape towns in this study, to co-fund the study? And that's just a question that we've raised. If you do the math, there's 22 towns between the 15 Cape Cod towns, the 6 Martha's Vineyard towns, and Nantucket. I'm not volunteering the town of Gosnold because they only have 12 year-round residents right now. But between the 22 towns, if you divide that $1.9 million, it comes out to roughly $85,000 per town, which is pretty minimal for potentially, like groundbreaking and parameter changing technology. So one of the things I was hoping the Water Alliance might take up, and I would, defer to Richard and Sherry on this, is a conversation about how can Martha's Vineyard back this study that MASSTC is undertaking and get involved in this project, so that we're effectively using our structures, which have successfully helped advance the nitro system approval. Can we do the same with urine diversion in partnership with MASSTC?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you see just how much the town of Oak Bluffs has spent, engineering, updating and improving, expanding the capacity of our sewer system. It's crazy money. It's not thousands, it's millions. So I would think that this would be an easy sell to all the towns, especially maybe to up island towns who have no thought in their minds about any sewering. So I would think this would be an easy sell.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Like it seemed to me that an $85,000 ask per town to advance this technology based on the experience the towns have with successfully implementing IA systems seems like a reasonable ask. Are there any other thoughts on that beyond Richard? Anyone
Yeah,
here who's
put it on
on the town board?
Put it on the warrants. This is the moment. Write up a proposal, give it to all 6 towns and see where it flies. Somebody will have to go to town meeting and defend it.
And would this also then include paying for the people who volunteer to be test cases?
This would be the $85,000 would go to MASSTC, and then in their budget, their plan is to budget in that financing for the $5,000 to $10,000 per household for the plumbing adaptation. So that would be included in the big grant, the big amount of money that they're applying for. Yes, that would be, the goal is to have that included in the total study cost.
IA systems for the John Smith, I'm pretty sure they got a grant for that. I don't think the town actually paid for it. I think there was a grant for it, but I can look into that.
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Oh, sorry. They should have got the town.
Sherry, can you move forward? We can't hear you. Maybe move closer to your speaker.
Yeah, my speaker's supposed to be on my head, but
Okay.
but I'm having trouble with my audio today. Town of Tisbury, I think they got a grant for the IA systems, but I will check with them. I don't think the town actually, but that's a good idea to go to the towns. It's like Water Alliance on its own is not a body that can make those decisions, but I know we have boards of health, and if they had interest, we could take it to the town, or as individual citizens from all the surrounding towns, we could definitely take it to them.
I see a question from Drew Belsky in the chat asking, what about the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund? And Sherry actually had a conversation with Adam today because Adam Turner sits on the board of the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, Sherry?
He does.
Do you want to talk about that? Do you want to talk about that conversation?
Yeah, we talked to Adam and said, could you take this with Julian Sear to the Cape and Island collaboration? It's like we're not actually in it, but Adam is he's a member, but he's we don't get the funds yet. And I said, could we take it to them and just say, could all of the towns? So we're looking into that also.
So that
Julian
conversation
Sear is definitely a proponent of this. So yeah, it was just a quick this morning, but we will continue with it.
So we got a yes from Adam that he would take it to the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. The Cape Cod Commission hasn't been as engaged in the urine diversion as it would be great for them to be, because they've been focusing mostly on the IA systems and sewering. So yes, we will go to them. It's the timing's a little bit weird with town meetings coming up, and but Adam did commit to doing that. Yes.
I saw that Thomas Moakley was here, but it looks like he's gone.
Oh, I should have introduced him earlier.
Yeah, that's
I
too
think
bad.
we lost him. Shoot.
Drew, did you
Thomas-
have a question?
I had asked it. Sorry, Laura. I think I direct messaged you because the chat, it just seems to be disabled. But my question was just the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, and just if we had looked into using that. Also, what would it take for the towns to sign up to join that? Because I don't believe any town from the island is a participant.
The towns need to have a CWMP or it's the equivalent of a 208. The commission is working with the Up Island towns on the 208, and that should be done by the end of the year and back to the towns. But that is West Tisbury, Chilmark, and Aquina. And I know Oak Bluffs has their CWMP, Edgartown, and Tisbury both working on it. So once they get the CWMPs, which is a 208 equivalent, they could join. And I know they're very eager to have the islands towns join. But once that was in, then we would have 6 votes to say this is the way we should spend the money. And we'd probably have Falmouth on our side too. So that's 7 votes. So very quickly we could get the votes to get the money for this if we were also in there.
And we're going to start engaging with Thomas Moakley, our incoming state rep. He's communicating very closely with the new incoming state rep, Hadley Luddy, for 4th Barnstable, which is the Lower Cape, Provincetown, Truro, Chatham, Wellfleet. They have similar wastewater concerns that we do. So I think we're going to get a lot of interest from that part of the Cape as well for moving this technology forward.
Yeah, those are the towns that are not going to put in sewers. They're too small, they're too spread out. They need to have other alternatives. So this is a really good alternative for them.
Great alternative.
Yeah. Bryan, can I ask a question? You had mentioned with the composter, could you put the urine in with the biochar or into the composter, and would that soil then be able to be used for food crops, or is that limited also?
I mean, so, at this point, it's still all reliant on regulations. I think in terms of pathogens, I'm confident that that type of system would deal with pathogens. The concern of pharmaceuticals, like I mentioned, the research that we have to date, shows that the public health risk of that is very minimal, but it is still a consideration.
Because the
Bryan,
composting, does it help break it down?
It does, yeah. It gets warm, it gets hot, and that's how it works. There's a lot of microbial activity, and there's quite a bit of heat. And so with a closed drum composter like the one that I showed, you can actually put a temperature data logger in the composter, so you can actually prove what temperature the material is at for what time, and that basically pasteurize the material through the composting process.
I see Maggie's hand up.
In Title V, it is actually currently approved to use composted, human manure, composted feces, to land apply that. That's actually currently approved right now. So I would think that it shouldn't be, too much of a problem to approve. I mean, urine's already included in those toilet systems. So it's just, needs to be formally approved by regulators.
Go ahead, Maggie.
I don't have
sorry about that. Oh,
sorry. I'm Maggie, the biochar fellow at MVC. I don't have the raised hand icon in my version of Zoom, but I can speak a little to how biochar could be incorporated in the composting. It would probably increase the amount of nitrogen capacity in the composting system because the biochar would hold more nitrogen in the pores provided by the urine. I've done really preliminary studies of growth tests with char charged with different mechanisms, and the urine charged char was a great success of calendula in IGI orchards. I don't have any quantified data on that application. It's more anecdotal at this point, but I'm hoping to get funding for formal nitrogen and phosphorus loading capacity from urine in contact with biochar. Oh, and as far as the carbon source capacity for biochar in the composting, that would be something worth studying as well, because the carbon available in char, although it's predominantly made of carbon, it's more stable carbon, so it's resistant to decomposing. but there is some of the carbon in biochar that would fulfill the carbon requirements for composting. So another tool in the toolkit that is another thing for MassDEP to get on board with regulating how waste and sanitation collide.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Anybody else? We're down to one screen here, so I can see everybody. No?
Richard, it was a great meeting.
Well, thank you. That was, yep, that's Sherry put this together, Sherry and Laura.
It sounds like there's a pretty, if I could just say, Richard, it sounds like there's a pretty high level of interest here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like particularly because we have this effort happening now island-wide to address our lack of an island-wide composting facility, that there may be a really nice opportunity here for the island to connect with MASSTC to potentially participate in this urine diversion study. Is that sort of, can I just see some like wavy hands to say maybe we're interested in that?
That is a great idea. I mean, I will bring this to the committee. I will text somebody right now about it who's in charge of it. But it'll help move this along and hopefully help us raise the money to buy this, you know, drum turner that we've got to have to do this. That's great. Before we go, I did mention, you know, the discussion, the battle, I should say, the battle between housing and water quality. And I think this was really, I mean, to hear that IHT is already planning on, you know, testing some of these systems, it should help that situation. But does anybody have any thoughts on I mean, I suppose we've already reached maximum capacity, whatever carrying capacity is of Martha's Vineyard, but we've got to address our housing for the local people, and we've got to figure out a way to do that and make it more affordable. So does anybody have any thoughts on that? We got just a few minutes left, but
yeah, so I would like to speak to that. And I think if I might, Richard, so the point of this conversation and and really trying to elevate the fact that IHT is so intimately involved in these conversations is that there should not be a conflict between water quality and environmental conservation and affordable housing. Like we have the same goals. We're working on the same goals. I've had a composting toilet system for 25 years. I mean, mine, I put mine in when, you know, when co-housing was researching theirs. So, you know, John Stanwood, who works for IHT, has a digester, an anaerobic digester that he's using to compost his food waste and power his grill. So those of us in the housing field, like we're deeply enmeshed in the sustainability community. And the concern for me, I see conservation and housing as having aligned goals. And what I would really like to elevate is that the affordable housing that we're seeing developed here on island is some of the most sustainable housing that we're seeing in the state of Massachusetts. And that my concern is not as much around affordable housing. My concern is around market rate development. And that if conservation and affordable housing can align our goals and work together in partnership, which I feel like has been done to a pretty significant degree here between the Land Bank and Island Housing Trust, it's a really good model to try to move forward these advances like urine diversion, like IA systems. You know, we can mandate those in affordable housing, but what are we doing about market rate development? What are we doing about impermeable surface? You know, Edgartown Planning Board just passed a really great bylaw that says there is a maximum square footage of impermeable surface between roofs, tennis courts, swimming pools, and driveways that you can have on a private property, period. And that's a much harder stop than a big house bylaw, because a big house bylaw just says when you get to a certain size, you have to go to the town for approval. We're still seeing huge, huge homes being approved here. And those homes they're operating year round now. They do not, the pipes do not get drained. The heat does not get shut off. The swimming pool is heated year round in a lot of cases. The problem lies with the market rate development, with the energy consumption, with the runoff, and with the water quality issues. not with our affordable housing. And we can use our affordable housing as the model for what we need to be doing with our market rate housing. But a sustained effort needs to happen to pressure the community and the towns to really look at market rate development as something that needs to be regulated as it impacts wastewater, and not just with the outflow, but with the impermeable surface also. 10,000 square feet is the max now in Edgartown. That's still a lot of impermeable surface. So are there ways that we can, you know, work together to really target that as a conversation, and to make sure that because our affordable housing is being developed as sustainable and net zero, that doesn't become a scapegoat or an easy target for saying, you know, we don't want to see more development. If we're going to see development, my pitch is that it should be net zero affordable housing. And if we're going to restrict what we're doing, it should be on the market rate and luxury end.
I think that is well spoken. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this housing versus water quality issue? Not seeing anybody.
I had one more point on, another benefit of urine diversion that we haven't touched on at all, and that's, the water conservation piece, because I think, the limits on housing are both the nutrient pollution and the overall water usage, which, magnified together, is the total load. So, I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, that it's like 4 out of 5 toilet flushes are for urine flushing alone. So there's huge water saving opportunities with urine diversion toilet systems as well.
Right. And if you can combine those with, one thing we haven't touched on is the composting toilets are right now not recognized by the state as a mitigation tool. And, I have had a waterless composting toilet for 25 years. So approximately, what did you say, Brian? That's keeping about 90%. What's that?
Well, yeah,
more.
The question is, how many gallons have you saved?
Right. How many gallons of water have we not used over the last 25 years? Because we literally never flush a toilet in our house. Yeah. So the next stage of this conversation is urine is an easier thing to regulate than solid waste, but that's the next step. If we can get the urine diversion pilot approved and get that 3-year DEP approval for wider application, we've got leverage to start talking about composting toilets, which takes care of the rest of the waste, right? And also removes and eliminates the flushing of water. And I dropped the Rich Earth Institute's website in the chat. They have all the data on how much gets flushed, what the savings is as far as water, et cetera, on their website. So I would encourage you to go to Rich Earth Institute and take a look at all of that.
Yeah, I'd add also that the pharmaceutical information is there as well, so check that out.
That's great. Okay, anybody else?
If anybody has any ideas on how to follow up and keep this active, if you have somebody else you want to hear from for the next meeting, let me know.
Yeah, so I think this is what's really, really good news. I mean, this is really positive, news that's can have a huge impact. I mean, I've been diverting pee. I don't want to go there, so how I'm doing it, but I've been doing it. Yeah, it's not that difficult. Okay, anybody else? No? All right, then I guess thank you very much, Brian. That was fantastic discussion. Fantastic.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah. And Richard, thank you. And Sherry for hosting this.
Thank you, Laura, for coming on board. Our great Martha's Vineyard Commission. Well, some people don't feel that way, but what the heck?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so
guys.
much, Brian. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much.
Brian, can you send us a copy of that presentation, please? That was a great PowerPoint that you put together.
Yep, will do.
Thank you so much.
I
Okay.
will include it.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Yeah.